Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a really complex stack of sources.
Yeah.
And they don't just, describe an economic recession or some kind of political upheaval. They're trying to get at something much deeper.
They really are. They're trying to dissect this profound, almost agonizing feeling of a civilized world that seems to be choosing to decay, from the inside out.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to try and understand how that happens, how competence, of all things, becomes a dangerous liability, and what happens when the very thing that creates wealth and security, human achievement, is framed as a moral evil.
And the immersion is just immediate. We start right there in this atmosphere of anxiety. The sources detail a period where people, a key character named Eddie Willers, for example, are just plagued by what's called an unexplained dread.
And it's a specific kind of sadness, isn't it? It seems to peak during the twilight hours.
Yeah.
It's this collective sense that everything could just break down at any moment.
Exactly, a sense that everything is provisional.
That detail about Eddie Willers, he's the vice president, special assistant at Taggart Transcontinental, it's so important because he's kind of the emotional barometer for this whole structure.
Yeah, he's not one of the titans, the builders, but he's not one of the looters either. He's this deeply loyal observer, and he's just carrying this constant nagging feeling that things are, and this is a quote, not protected against the empty space above.
Wow. That phrase, unprotected against the empty space above, that really gets to the heart of the anxiety, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It suggests that, stability isn't a given. It's something that has to be constantly earned, constantly maintained. And Eddie, he sees it in small things. He'll look at a pile of bright gold carrots on a pushcart and suddenly wish they were covered up, protected.
It's a complete inversion of trust in the world around you.
It is. He sees the whole system cracking to pieces like this all over the country. And he has this sense that you can expect it anywhere at any moment.
So that's the atmosphere, this pervasive dread. And within that, the sources immediately set up the central conflict. It's really a struggle between two fundamentally different types of people.
Right. On one side, you have the people dedicated to production, the builders, the creators. And on the other, you have those who seem to thrive only by siphoning off the chaos that's created by failure.
And the sources don't waste any time introducing us to the main players on the production side, the architects of achievement.
First up is Dagny Taggart. She's the vice president in charge of operation for Taggart Transcontinental, or TT. And her value is just immediate. It's physical. The men who actually run the trains, the engineers, the firemen, they all know she is who runs Taggart Transcontinental.
She's defined by this incredible decisiveness, authority, and this laser focus on objective results. Not on consensus, not on what's popular, but on what works.
Then you have Hank Rearden, the industrialist. And for him, it's not just that he's dedicated to his work. He is his work.
What do you mean by that?
The sources describe how his entire personal history, all his struggles, the years he spent in the iron mines, he only allows himself to reflect on it in honor of that piece of metal that he created. His whole life is validated by that one act of achievement.
So he's a man who just despises indulgence, measures everything by productive effort.
Fiercely. He is a fascinating figure because he doesn't just produce steel, he sort of represents integrity in production. He values achievement over literally everything else. When people criticize him for being unpopular, for having a bad press, he just asks, what for? It's steel that I'm selling.
He's totally indifferent to the political climate. He believes the value of his product is its only moral measure.
And that brings us back to our barometer, Eddie Willers. He's so devoted to the railroad, he's described almost as a feudal serf to the company's legacy. He's that anxious, conscientious observer watching the whole thing just disintegrate.
Right. He embodies the confusion of someone with profoundly good intentions who is completely trapped by the decay all around him.
And he's constantly remembering the still brilliant sunlight of the railroad's past from his childhood, and those memories are just this painful contrast to the chaos of his present. His loyalty is proving to be, well, not enough against a system that has just inverted all of its goals.
Okay, so let's unpack that core tension right away. Let's focus on the physical symbol of achievement in this world, Rearden metal. This is really ground zero for the whole conflict.
It really is. The creation of this alloy is just a monument to focused human effort. Rearden spent 10 full years on these incredibly complex, sustained experiments to create it.
And the description of the first pour of the metal, it's almost mystical. It's not just molten iron. It's described as having the pure white color of sunlight, a satin texture, and a friendly radiance.
That imagery of sunlight is so critical. It implies that what Rearden has made is transparently good. It's based on rational facts, on strength, on utility. It stands in direct opposition to the murky, ambiguous darkness of the moral atmosphere they're all living in.
And it's factually better. It has a strength and lightness that's far beyond conventional steel, making it superior both economically and functionally.
Absolutely. And Rearden's personal view of his work, it's reflected in his total indifference to what anyone else thinks. He just focused on his customers and the quality of the product. The sources note that he viewed any pain or hardship he suffered during that decade of research as, quote, not a valid reason for stopping.
The pain was just the price of admission for the achievement.
Precisely.
So with this incredible innovation, enter the conflict with mediocrity. And it's personified by Dagny's own brother, the president of TT, James Taggart.
Jim Taggart's opposition to Rearden Metal is so telling because it has nothing to do with a technical assessment. It's purely emotional. His reason is, I don't like Henry Rearden.
So it's personal animosity.
It's personal, and he cloaks it in this language of false social concern. He argues the metal is unsafe because nobody has ever used it before. He shifts the focus away from engineering facts and toward this abstract, unquantifiable human element.
He's terrified of anything new, anything that might threaten the comfortable mediocrity he represents. But the irony is, Dagny is forced to use Rearden Metal because the existing system is already on the verge of a total, documented collapse.
She confronts him on it directly. She tells him the railroad is falling apart, and Rearden is the only one who can give them to us. She risks everything. She commits to using this unproven metal for the absolutely vital Rio Norte line.
And we get some context for just how desperate the company's finances are with the San Sebastian disaster.
Right. Dagny just bluntly calls the $40 million loss on that Mexican line a catastrophe that Jim is actively ignoring. He just dismisses the reality of it, the impending nationalization by the Mexican government, as vicious rumors and bad inside authority.
That's the looter philosophy in a nutshell, isn't it? Avoid the real physical facts, like a railroad built on shifting political sand, and instead favor these comforting insider whispers or ideological consensus.
Exactly. If you base your decisions on inside authority instead of objective reality, failure is baked into the system.
But Dagny is grounded in reality. She forces the issue, and that commitment leads to the greatest achievement in the company's crumbling history, the John Galt line.
She pushes ahead with construction on the Rio Norte line using Rearden Metal, and she eventually renames it the John Galt line, which transforms this phrase she initially thought was just empty slang into a symbol of pure achievement.
And it was a staggering engineering feat. It was tailored specifically to take advantage of the new alloy's unique qualities.
It was. Rearden engineered a custom, never-before-made 1,200-foot truss span. And because the metal was so much lighter and stronger, they got this dramatic cost reduction. The estimate was $2 million, but the actual cost came in at only $800,000.
That's not just saving money. That's multiplying human effort through genius. It's concrete proof that rational thought is the greatest efficiency booster imaginable.
And the maiden run itself, it becomes this symbolic triumph. For both Dagny and Rearden, the experience is described not as a journey, but as a smooth flight. It's a feeling of earned achievement, of enjoyment, a moment where they feel they had earned the present. They were liberated by the objective success of their work.
Then comes the press conference. And this is where they really just declare war on the whole moral system.
Oh, absolutely. The reporters are expecting the usual platitudes, public service, social responsibility. But when they ask about their motivation, Dagny says her motive is to earn a profit for you, Miss Taggart, since she's a major shareholder.
And Rearden is even more direct. Because the metal costs less to produce than anyone saw it, he proudly states he expects to skin the public to the tune of a profit of 25% in the next few years.
Can you imagine saying that today?
No. I mean, they weren't hiding behind any euphemisms. They were proudly proclaiming the profit motive as the moral justification for what they did. They provided immense value, safer, cheaper transport, and they demanded immense value in return.
And in this decaying world, that was seen as an act of brazen, almost criminal defiance. They were traitors, not martyrs.
That kind of statement was a declaration of war. And, predictably, the established order responded with controls. Which brings us to the world of the looters and how their philosophy got translated into crippling legislation.
Yeah, the atmosphere of decay really solidified through the legal system. The first major blow the sources detail is something called the Equalization of Opportunity Bill, or the EOB.
And this was passed suddenly, and it just fundamentally changed the rules of the game. It made achievement a liability.
Right. We see the direct consequence through the story of Dwight Sanders. He owned the country's only viable aircraft plant. To avoid the EOB, which was designed to break up successful companies and, redistribute control, he had to engage in this complex, dishonest setup.
Selling his own plant to his brother just so he could take over another company, United Locomotive, to build the diesel engines that TT desperately needed.
The law didn't get rid of the need for competence, it just criminalized it. It forced honest, productive men to operate through these layers of legal dishonesty just to keep things running.
And this bill crushed Hank Rearden's initial optimism after the John Galt line.
Right. Completely. He realized his entire decade of work could be, quote, destroyed at the whim of some men who sat and voted. Men who couldn't bring a single ounce of ore out of the earth themselves.
That moment of realization, when a producer recognizes that the political will of total strangers can just unilaterally negate their greatest achievements, that must be devastating.
And the government wasn't done. They moved from redistribution to just total stasis, with Directive Number 10-289.
This thing is the ultimate blueprint for intellectual and economic strangulation. It establishes total stability.
But the goal wasn't stability as we understand it, a foundation for growth. The goal was to stop all movement. They wanted to prevent being at the mercy of every stray crank with a new idea.
Let's just break down some of the key provisions because they are terrifying. Point 4 specifically suspended the Office of Patents and Copyrights. It said, no new devices, inventions, products, or goods of any nature whatsoever, not now on the market, shall be produced.
They literally made the future illegal.
Innovation is banned. And then point 5 freezes production. Every single entity shall henceforth produce the same amount of goods per year as they or he produced during the basic year, no more and no less.
And this is the critical insight that I think often gets missed. By freezing production at that basic year level, they guaranteed the system would fail. Because the basic year output assumed the efficiency and competence of all the productive men who were still working at that time.
Men like Ellis Wyatt and Ken Danager who are now vanishing.
Exactly. They froze the output level, but they didn't freeze the decay of the infrastructure, and they certainly didn't account for the loss of intellectual capital.
So the directive is self-annihilating.
By design. It's not aimed at maximizing output. It's aimed at maximizing control and redistributing the scarcity that is now inevitable. Point 7 just finalizes it by freezing all wages, prices, and profits. The men who wrote it, they knew their motive. We can't afford to move. They can't afford change because change exposes their incompetence.
It's the ultimate expression of the second-rater's fear. Fear of being obsolete, fear of competition, fear that the competent will expose their fraud.
And this fear is always cloaked in this perverse philosophy of the morality of need versus achievement. And James Taggart, of course, is a champion of this. He claims he serves the public welfare.
He criticizes Rearden for focusing on profit. He suggests Rearden should be worried about the underprivileged and the need for plain iron in places like the People's State of China instead of building his superior metal.
And the sources show this exact morality playing out in the most intimate setting imaginable. Rearden's own home. His brother, Philip Rearden, is the perfect example of this philosophy.
Right. Philip asks Hank to hire him, even though he can't do the work. He collects money for no selfish interest and talks about spiritual needs over competence. He wants the salary, but not the responsibility or the effort that's required to earn it.
The dialogue between Rearden and his mother about Philip is just chilling because it strips the whole concept of worth completely bare. When Rearden objects, saying, but he knows nothing about the steel business, his mother just dismisses it. What has that got to do with it? He needs a job.
Wow. The concept of value is just completely inverted. Hank sees the fraud hiring someone for a salary they can't possibly earn, and his mother accuses him of having no pity and only thinking of his profit.
The moral demand is explicit. You must sacrifice your competency, your standards, your profit for the need of your destroyers. The higher your achievement, the greater your moral obligation to abandon it for those who achieved nothing.
And this atmosphere of intellectual compromise, it wasn't just in government or in families. It corrupted the highest centers of thought. It led to the collapse of intellectual standards at the State Science Institute.
The whole institute was built on the reputation of one man, Dr. Robert Stadler. He was a once great scientist whose name acted like cosmic rays to secure the funding. This massive white marble building was a personal gift to him, built to free science from the rule of the dollar.
But when Dagny goes to see him, she finds him in this small, cheap office. It's a physical representation of how peripheral the actual scientists have become in their own institution.
She finds a man surrounded by just profound misery and what he calls the crushing boredom of mediocrity. Stadler admits the institute is now run by incompetence, especially by a man named Dr. Floyd Ferris, whom he calls the priceless valet of science.
A valet of science. What does that even mean?
Ferris caters only to the morons who vote the funds. He makes sure that science is judged solely by the latest little gadget it produces for political appeasement, not by genuine discovery or fact.
Stadler's confession to Dagny is just heartbreaking. He tells her he can't issue a public statement endorsing Rearden metal even though he knows it's actually superior because there are other issues involved, besides questions of fact.
His lament is so profound. He bemoans his loneliness for a mind to respect and an achievement to admire. The man who wanted to free science from the dollar now finds science enslaved to political consensus and public opinion.
And the intellectual justification for this whole collapse is provided by Stadler's former collaborator, a philosopher named Dr. Pritchett.
Pritchett explicitly advocates for control to ensure freedom. He argues that since a free economy cannot exist without competition, we must control men in order to force them to be free.
Wait, that's a direct self-refuting contradiction. How do they even justify that kind of cognitive dissonance in their philosophy?
They justify it by destroying the very concept of knowledge itself. Pritchett asserts that the purpose of philosophy is not to seek knowledge or truth, but to prove that knowledge is impossible to man.
And if knowledge is impossible, what's left? What does the world rely on?
Instinct, Dr. Pritchett declared reverently. And that is the final intellectual collapse. The abandonment of reason as a tool for living, replacing it with dogma wrapped in pseudo-philosophical jargon and fear. It removes the need for competence entirely, because if facts don't matter, then neither does objective achievement.
That's terrifying. If you're forced to rely on instinct, then the loudest, most politically connected voice wins every single time. Okay, so this systemic decay, the political controls, the moral inversion, the intellectual surrender, it all culminates in this undeniable, tangible phenomenon we see in Section 4, the mystery of the vanishing men.
Right. The pattern of desertion starts small, but it signals this profound intentionality behind it. Eddie Willers first reports that McNamara, the reliable contractor, he just quit. No warning, no cause, no explanation, just avoids suddenly appearing in the supply chain.
And the desertions, they become more severe, more symbolic. The great oil industrialist, Ellis Wyatt, vanishes. He just walks away from his entire enterprise.
And soon after, his oil fields are deliberately destroyed. They're left burning. A permanent beacon that becomes known as Wyatt's torch. And that act leaves this deep feeling of vague apprehension across the country. It shows this isn't just a business failure, it's a moral refusal.
Dagny, who's still clinging to the old way of thinking, she initially dismisses Wyatt. She calls him a greedy bastard who's after nothing but money.
But the pattern just accelerates. Ken Danager of Danager Coal, one of the last honest men left, he vanishes. And Dagny frantically tries to reach him. She senses that he's ready for the destroyer, realizing that someone, a man, a system, is deliberately cutting down the buttresses of the economy.
The sources show Danager struggling so intensely with this decision. He tells Dagny that his business means more than you will care to believe. And yet he still walks away. He leaves no letter, breaks a promise he had made to stay.
It's such a powerful statement. They are not deserting their value. They are refusing to let their value be enslaved by the looter's world. Their achievements are no longer tied to the physical landmass of this decaying system.
And this existential quest to understand why they're all disappearing, it leads Dagny and Rearden on this rare vacation drive. And that's where they uncover a crucial historical clue, the unsolvable problem of the motor.
They stumble upon the ruins of the 20th Century Motor Company factory in Starnesville, Wisconsin. The plant is just overgrown, destroyed, abandoned. It's a tomb to industry.
And in the wreckage, Dagny finds the broken remnant of a model motor, a unique design that was intended to run on atmospheric electricity using some kind of unknown fuel.
Rearden, who immediately recognizes the genius of the design, he estimates that if this motor had been successfully manufactured, it would have added about 10 years to the life of every person in this country. It represents pure, breathtaking potential that was just destroyed by its environment.
And they learned the factory went bankrupt after the founder, Jed Starnes, died. His heirs ran it into the ground with a supposedly noble plan that was based on the principle we have now seen again and again across this moral landscape, from each according to his ability to each according to his need.
Right, and this section is a deep, dark dive into the practical implementation of pure altruism as a functional economic system. A former employee details how that moral code immediately resulted in total corruption.
Because pay was determined by need, not by production.
Workers began competing for who'd do the worst job possible. They turned into beggars, rotten, whining, sniveling beggars. They were ashamed of their work, but they were forced to list their deepest miseries, even down to having patched drawers, just to get their portion.
It incentivized incompetence and suffering. The dark humor here is just excruciating. I mean, why would you strive for excellence if excellence makes you financially liable for the needs of your worst colleagues?
The moral degradation went even deeper. The source describes how the community started to resent new children being born because they were new dependents to feed. And in the most chilling instance, town members wished for an old woman who broke her hip to die quickly, just to save the community the medical expenses that would be diverted from the pool of need.
So the system didn't elevate the needy. It dragged down the competent and corrupted the character of literally everyone involved. And when the collapse finally came, who fled first?
The engineers and competent workers were the first to flee. They ran first. The Starnes heirs, naturally, they blamed the failure not on the system's premise, but on human nature not being good enough for their noble ideal.
The factory's demise was self-inflicted. It was built on a moral premise that tortured its best workers. Dagny becomes obsessed with finding the unknown young engineer who invented that motor, the man whose invention was so great that it had to be destroyed.
And the former chief engineer's wife tells her he looked oddly and said his incredible invention would just become nothing.
Dagny realizes the pattern. Someone, this destroyer, has reversed the principle of the 20th century motor. Instead of creating energy from the air, this destroyer is turning all the kinetic energy of achievement into static.
And this movement, this strike of the productive, it's being paralleled by another fascinating character who is operating completely outside the legal structure. Ragnar Daneskjold, the pirate.
Daneskjold isn't just a criminal. He sees himself as operating on a higher moral plane. He specifically intercepts foreign aid shipments like coal, intended for socialist regimes like the People's State of England, and he challenges the very concept of law.
Rearden is confronted by him directly. Daneskjold gives Rearden a sample of gold, and he explains that it's a collection of the money that was stolen from Rearden by looters' money that was taken from the Bureau of Global Relief. The pirate is essentially acting as the moral accountant for the productive class.
But wait, isn't his piracy completely self-refuting? He's fighting lawlessness by being lawless himself. How does the source reconcile that?
Daneskjold forces Rearden, and by extension us, to redefine what lawfulness even means. He asks Rearden if he would prefer him to be a law-abiding citizen, abiding by Directive 10-289, which mandates the destruction of wealth and competence.
Ah, I see.
Daneskjold is arguing that the current legal structure is inherently evil, and his form of piracy is the true protection of value. He's challenging the premise that the state has the moral right to dispose of the property of productive men.
It's a refusal to sanction the moral premises of the regime. He's telling Rearden that the money he's stealing is legally defined as aid, but morally defined as theft, and he's returning the stolen goods to their rightful owner. He even tells Rearden he's holding a massive bank account for him, the total sum of money taken from Rearden by force, and he'll turn it over when the strike is over.
Daneskjold is forcing Rearden to confront the idea that in a morally inverted world, virtue can often look like criminality.
That sets the stage perfectly for the intellectual climax of our sources. Section 5, the philosophy of Francisco d'Anconia. Francisco, Dagny's childhood friend and the heir to this massive copper empire, has engineered his own public ruin.
For years, Francisco deliberately cultivated this public image of a worthless bum, a hedonistic playboy who sank millions into worthless ventures and scandals. This is all a deliberate facade. He was hiding his true moral purpose and his intellectual rigor behind this mask of depravity.
His confession to Dagny must have been shocking. He admits he engineered the entire San Sebastian debacle that cost TT $40 million and deliberately crashed Anconia copper stock, making himself briefly richer from the tax implications. He calls the whole thing the farce.
Dagny sees it as a betrayal, but Francisco forces her to look at his motive. And his motive wasn't self-enrichment. It was destruction as an act of moral necessity.
What do you mean?
He recognized that Anconia copper could have lasted for generations of looters and slaves. He had to destroy his lifetime of inherited and created achievement himself to prevent it from serving the ends of their enemies. He destroyed it as an act of ownership, of defiance. He was preventing his brilliance from becoming the fuel for the looters' fire.
And this realization leads directly into Francisco's philosophical core, the moral code of money and value. This is where the source material completely flips that conventional wisdom that money is the root of all evil.
Francisco argues that money isn't dirty or inherently corrupt. It is a token of honor, a claim upon the energy of producers, based fundamentally on the principle of voluntary trade. Money is valuable only because men produce value. When production stops, money just becomes worthless pieces of paper.
He argues that looters, they seize money by force, but they can't give it value because they don't produce anything. When production is punished and looting is rewarded, the money supply gets disconnected from reality and the world just inevitably crumbles.
And this is a crucial, subtle point. The looter's deadliest weapon, he explains, isn't political power or guns. It's the moral code that demands sacrifice. It demands that producers surrender their wealth, their talent, their lives for the needs of their destroyers. The system depends on the virtue of the productive man who believes he has a moral duty to feed those who hate him.
He confronts Rearden with this directly, doesn't he? He asks, do you care to purchase, at the price of your great endurance, at the price of your agony, the satisfaction of the needs of your own destroyers?
Yes. Francisco is basically saying that Rearden's competence is the battery, and the looters aren't plugging into the wall. They're plugging directly into the battery and draining it. And Rearden has been too moral, too self-sacrificing to pull the plug.
And this philosophical framework, it extends powerfully to the personal and emotional lives of the producers, particularly in Francisco's discussion of love, sex, and self-worth with Rearden.
Rearden is trapped in this agonizing relationship with his wife, Lillian, who is the epitome of the passive looter. She demands his emotional energy while at the same time despising his actual greatness. She uses passive aggression and veiled insults.
She wears the bracelet made of Rearden metal, the physical symbol of his achievement, and deliberately makes it look like an ugly piece of dime store jewelry next to her expensive conventional diamonds. She's using his creation to diminish him.
And Francisco gives Rearden this brutal but liberating diagnosis. Love, he explains, is a response to one's highest values, not to pity or need. If a man like Rearden has been convinced by the looter's moral code of guilt and self-denial that he is worthless, he will be drawn to a woman he secretly despises, like Lillian, because she will reflect his own secret self. In his subconscious, he feels he deserves her scorn.
And conversely, that same guilt makes him impotent toward a woman he genuinely loves because he's already damned himself. He feels that depravity is all he is worthy of enjoying. Rearden immediately recognizes the painful truth in this. He realizes his own personal conflict was rooted in accepting the enemy's moral code of guilt.
Francisco's true intent wasn't just to talk philosophy. It was to give Rearden the moral sanction he needed to stop torturing himself with unearned guilt. He came to that party solely to tell Rearden the words you need for the time when you'll need them. And this marks Rearden's final, total intellectual break from the world of sacrifice.
And this sanction, it immediately shows up in Rearden's public life. When he's charged in court for violating regulations, probably related to the EOB or Directive 10-289, he refuses to defend himself.
He tells the judge he is complying with the law to the letter. He says, "Your law holds that my life, my work, and my property may be disposed of without my consent. Very well, you may now dispose of me without my participation in the matter."
So he accepted the penalty, whatever it was.
A severe financial punishment. But he utterly refused the moral premise of the proceedings. He denied them his soul, which is the ultimate, non-physical act of the strike.
Now we shift to Section 6, the terrible, inevitable conclusion of all this decay, the Taggart Comet disaster. Dagny returns to TT after the strike of the productive men is in full swing, and she finds the system in severe terminal disrepair.
The creating decay is just everywhere. Equipment is breaking down routinely. The State Science Institute is freezing because of oil shortages, an immediate consequence of Ellis Wyatt vanishing and his torch burning. The chief engineer had resigned 5 years prior, replaced by a mediocrity. Dagny sees a jagged crack in her office wall and realizes she is alone in the ruins of a building.
The system is structurally failing. And the tragedy, it hinges on the TT tunnel, which was once this marvel built for clean, smokeless, diesel-electric engines.
Right. But because of shortages, rotary plows breaking down, new ones unavailable because Orrin Boyle had cut off the necessary steel supply. The only engine available for the luxury passenger liner, the Comet, is an old, inadequate coal burner.
And the Comet, carrying all these VIPs, including this Washington figure Kip Chalmers, one of those bureaucrats who operates purely on political clout, not competence, is ordered into the 8-mile tunnel despite the known ventilation failure risk from the old coal burner.
The operational failure is driven entirely by institutional fear. The key figure here is the chief dispatcher, Bill Brent. He cannot bring himself to endanger the hundreds of passengers, but he's terrified of the consequences of delaying Mr. Chalmers. That would put his job and his family's security at risk under the rule of the Unification Board, the enforcers of Directive 10-289.
He's forced into a morally impossible conflict that just wouldn't have existed in a rational world. In the past, protecting passenger safety would have guaranteed his own job security. Now, he realizes he has to choose victims, the passengers, or his own children's well-being.
When he tries to resign in protest, the train master, Mitchum, he physically assaults him and screams that Brent is a lawbreaker and a coward. The system is demanding suicide, not service.
So the train goes forward, and that's when the fumes really start to hit them inside the tunnel. The conductor, looking at the windows of the Comet, feels this contemptuous indifference toward the passengers who are now panicking.
And this is the moral inversion fully manifested. The conductor concludes that if the passengers had asked for and accepted Directive 10-289, then they do not deserve his sacrifice or the risk of punishment by the Unification Board that he would face for delaying or stopping the train.
He refuses to warn them.
He refuses. He has chosen himself, and his refusal to sacrifice his life for those who endorse the sacrifice of others is the final blow to the system.
The inevitable happens. The train stalls inside the 8-mile bore because of the heavy smoke and a panicked passenger pulling the emergency brake. Almost everyone on board dies of suffocation. The Comet disaster is the literal physical manifestation of the moral decay. It's the moment when the philosophy of self-sacrifice literally costs hundreds of human lives.
And Dagny is left surveying the wreckage. The catastrophe forces Dagny's decision, a complete break with the failed legacy. She instructs Eddie Willers to find the old maps, the road as it existed before the tunnel was even built. She plots a route around the tunnel.
It's a symbolic act of separation from the disaster and the system that produced it.
It is. She then leaves the railroad, and standing in the darkened city looking at the sparse lights in the industrial flats of New Jersey, she has her final, piercing realization. The world belongs to the men who invent the lights and the motorsmen like Rearden, not to the swords, the moans, and the guns.
She realizes that her own virtue, her endurance, her generosity in continuing to work was her enemy's only tool.
She sees that your unrequited rectitude is the only hold they have upon you. Her persistence was the anchor holding the looters' world together. By quitting, she denies them her mind, her talent, and her labor. She chooses to protect her value rather than sacrifice it.
So as we draw this deep dive to a close, what does this all mean for us? Let's try to synthesize the true nature of this conflict.
Well, the sources reveal this profound, unyielding difference between two philosophies. The producers, Rearden, Dagny, Wyatt, Laniger, they're all motivated by achievement, by self-enjoyment, by rational self-interest. Their drive is what creates value and builds civilization.
And conversely, the looters, Jim, Philip, Lillian, Pritchett, Ferris, they're motivated by fear, by envy, and by this relentless moral demand for sacrifice. They equate virtue with need and with pain. They just consume value. The key conflict isn't really political or economic theory. It's a moral battle over who has the right to exist and on what terms.
And we saw two sides of this idea of going dark. On one hand, you have the productive, like Ellis Wyatt and Ken Daniger, who choose to vanish from a system that tortures them. They take their kinetic energy and their intellectual light with them. They are deliberately stopping the motor.
And on the other hand, the physical world itself spirals into literal darkness. The dying city lights, the breaking equipment, and the great TT tunnel becoming a suffocation chamber. The very structures of civilization crumble when the producers refuse to carry the burden of the incompetent any longer. The decay is visible, it's touchable, and it's deadly.
Dagny, having resigned, is left still searching. She's searching for that missing engineer, the inventor of the atmospheric electricity motor, the man who knew his invention would become nothing in that world and chose to vanish. She's seeking the answer to what must come next now that she's admitted defeat to the current system.
And Francisco provided the final, provocative thought for her right before she left. When she asks him where her road leads now that she's abandoned the world, he smiles and he answers, "To Atlantis, the lost city that only the spirits of heroes can enter."
And this raises the ultimate question we want to leave you to mull over. What happens when a system is so morally inverted that its most competent and productive members realize that the world they are fighting to protect is no longer a reality but only a thought? When movement and progress are literally forbidden by mandates like Directive 10-289, the system has successfully turned kinetic energy into static.
When that happens, is the only rational choice for the hero to deny the destroyers their fuel, abandon the sinking continent, and seek a new world built entirely on the moral sanction of achievement. If your endurance is their only tool, what do you do when you realize the only way to win is to walk away?